It's Friday, Feedback Friday, the feedbackiest day of the week. It's Feedback Friday. And this Feedback Friday, forgive if you hear banging in the background. They're still working on my roof. It's hit and miss. But yeah, it's Feedback Friday. And as you see, the title of the video is Why Money Isn't Put into Men's Content. And some people don't believe me when I show stuff like this. Now, to be clear, one of these comments is probably a troll. Another one is somebody who, I don't know, just flipped their shit. But the troll, I'm saying this as somebody who has spent decades in the media and had to deal with sponsors. I was just at a sponsor event last weekend. And this stuff matters. It matters with government. It matters with, corporate. Nobody wants toxic associations. Nobody wants bad PR. The idea that all press is good press, all attention is good attention, that went out the window with cancel culture. Brands are usually very careful about who they associate with unless someone has a massive amount of followers. And let's face it, the only way to get that is to rage bait most of the time. So, the idea that nobody puts money into sort of men-centered content is not true. Look at Joe Rogan. But he doesn't do men's issues, right? He does pop culture with a particular point of view. And there's an argument about whether that's just invisible men's culture. There's so much commentary on that stuff from men that's popular that it's sort of, well, there's male content all over the place. It's just not called men's content. That's one point of view. The other is, Joe Rogan's a toxic, self-hating idiot. I want particular things from a more informed position that doesn't have conspiracy theorists on as guests. And fair. I'm not taking a side on that one. I'm just presenting both sides. But, there is a reason that people don't do content focused on men and men's issues. And it is the posturing toxicity that comes into it. Let me show you, but let me help support this channel first. Help support this channel. Become a monthly patron if you want to support men's content. Patreon.com/LeannaK, or buy a one-time Leanna Care session for someone who can use it but can't afford it. Coffee.com/LeannaK for guys who want to work stuff like this out without dealing with the toxicity. Now, those of you who've been watching my channel for some time know I was very hesitant to get into men's issues because I am not a man. And I was talked into it. I still think those people are right. It's been productive. I think there have to be discussions across, the ideological perspectives, but there's never going to be money in it as long as stuff like this happens. And I'll show it to you, and then I'll explain why, because you'll be going, this is just a troll, and you're right. But I'll explain the process, all right? So you'll see this guy spam the comment section, and for people who their comment wasn't displaying, YouTube slows down the display of comments when you spam, so thank this guy and a couple others, but it's much less suffering than being in a relationship with a modern woman. You go ahead and feel your feelings. We have better things to do and better women to date elsewhere. You modern women have much larger fish to fry than what men are watching. Do you realize, dearest narrator, that the hive mind has been destroyed? You are the least marriageable women. Apparently, I'm multiple women on the planet. You are so far behind that you will never catch up. And you'll notice I said, sir, this is an Arby's. Upset at the thought of no longer being able to control men. Yes, we are responsible for the dissolution of the hive mind. One of its facets, shaming, is overused here in this video. Just like a woman. The Arby's remark. Again, a blatant attempt at, again, failed hive mind. This is known as deflection. Men, she has no argument against my original statement. So I've been married for 25 years. Your central premise was wrong and irrelevant. then it is especially not your business if you've been married that long. Not woman enough to show my responses. It's okay, a lot of that going around. Your responses display. Seek help. If you're gonna keep up this cheap bait, I will hide you from the channel because you're spamming and you're boring. And I mean, this wasn't it. More like it just went on and on and on. We especially don't care what English-speaking women from North America say about anything. It's completely research-driven. Anything mentioned is evolutionary female psychology. Like, but an advertiser sees that and goes, I don't want any part of that. Well, why? Because people will see that and say, why are you supporting this? Why are you supporting this flagrant misogyny? And there is no defense against that right now. And it's because things have gotten not only incredibly toxic online, and I want to be clear that there are plenty of good men out there. There are plenty of good comments. I will get to one that was less terrible than this, but equally like, please don't do that. And then some more interesting ones. But I want to be clear. Part of the thing I'm trying to do is center good men, but it keeps getting derailed by this shit. And the key advertiser demographic. Now, YouTube is skewing more and more male. TikTok is where young women are. But some women watch YouTube as well. Older women. And it's that 35 to 54-year-old woman demographic that advertisers want. And they're not going to want to be attached to attitudes like that. And we're caught in this, again, like I said off the top, one school of thought that men's issues are so centered. You know, we have a bazillion superhero movies dealing with men's feelings. But that's fiction, right? But people will say, well, there's plenty out there. There's plenty of discussion about this. And what I've heard, people who insist I talk to no men in this space, doesn't even make any sense. But what I've heard is that there's no things that are labeled as men's issues so people can easily find it, and men don't see themselves in the superheroes because they don't have superpowers. All right. I can't control Disney. I think that, you know, the attempts to center characters like Ant-Man are an answer to that. I mean, Ant-Man Quantumania was one of the most expensive of the Marvel films. It's wild. But, you know, it's almost getting lost because it's not labeled for men, because Hollywood is still coming at it that there's people stuff and women's stuff. It's getting lost. Okay, fair. But there's never gonna be any money in it unless you directly support content like this, because, you know, there's a reason I keep my It's Not Therapy stuff separate branded from this, because it's toxic. And I'm not saying I agree. I wish advertisers had more of a spine, but they don't. And nobody can control that. The reality is, as long as that toxic element, and you could argue that, you know, trolling like that is, there's a lot of like foreign interference in that stuff, because they're trying to peel off disillusioned young men to disrupt, you know, the function of a democracy and our inherent trust in each other. That's one theory. Again, I know the conversations I've had off the record. I have no proof to offer here. So that's why, for people saying, why isn't there money in this? That's why. It's just the brand concentration is either in generic YouTube ads geared at men, geared at content, because they assume YouTube content is geared at men unless otherwise, because like I said, women are on TikTok. But it's also that the whole manosphere concept is so toxic that there's really no way to engage with it unless you're somebody who's put in a lot of work, like, you know, say a Pete Buttigieg. There's really no way to engage with it without being accused of, you know, propping up the worst elements of it. And it's not fair. It isn't. It's not fair. This has been an issue for 10 years. That anybody who attempts to have a conversation with people you don't agree with, you're accused of platforming them or, you know, normalizing it. And that's, you know, that's not how dialogue works. That's not how debate works. And, you know, if we could filter this stuff off, and I am strongly considering just hiding this guy from the channel because he's adding nothing. The account's from August 2024, so it's probably a burner, and that kind of stuff. But I wanted to show it just because some people don't believe me that when, you know, men disagree with me, sometimes women too, right from my looks. And again, whether it's true or not is irrelevant. Whether I'm the ugliest hag ever to inhabit the planet, it shouldn't matter. That isn't that shouldn't be the requirement in terms of analyzing data and presenting ideas. But the guy did me a favor in that one of the things I pointed out in that video was the fact that the manosphere still uses women's approval as a benchmark for masculinity, and the idea that we have better women to date. You're still giving away your power, bro. Like, you're still making ideal masculinity about the type of women you can attract. And that is unhealthy for men. You know, we talk to women about the I don't need no man thing. But here's the truth of it. If you need that kind of attention and approval, you can never get in a place where you want it or you want it from a specific person. It's this requirement. It's requisite. And that's not healthy because life isn't just about needs. A happy life involves a few wants too. And you cannot make any woman like you, right? You can't make any man like you. I mean, like so many of those old comic books, like, you know, Superman or Spider-Man, the woman they're interested in, the woman they're in love with, doesn't love them back at first in original canon. And, you know, I do think there's something important in that narrative of you still have worth even though you're rejected. You know, I still have worth even though guys continue to take cracks at my looks. Get in line, troll. Hassan Piker beat you to it. I kind of think these guys protest too much personally. But it is, to me, not ideally masculine. It is not strong. It is not stoic to take those sorts of cheap shots. Every time a guy comes at me that way, Go back 10 years, Milo Yiannopoulos was telling me I get my tits out for a living. So back then, I was just a slut that men only wanted to look at. Now, and so I couldn't have an opinion, right? My opinion wasn't valid because I was too sexualized and just some dumb slut. Now I'm too ugly to have an opinion. You see how it works? It just... And it's not like women on Instagram don't do this to people too. There it's you're old. And it's all meaningless. It really, really is. But I know certain people are just terrified of this sort of negative attention, including a lot of men. Women are used to it, believe it or not. You know, you don't get out of the teenage years without, you know, somebody telling you you're too ugly to breathe. But it seems to just hit young men these days like a ton of bricks. And I personally think that this whole your looks matter more than anything else, it's hurting men and boys in really, really profound ways, because quite frankly, the stuff you have to do to look the way they look in those superhero movies, it's not, those are 12-week cycle training, right? You can't look that way all the time. That is really intense workouts and drugs. And women don't want that. Women don't need that. There you go. That's a compressor pump outside, that buzz. So moving on to some of the other stuff that goes on when you try to talk about this stuff. I don't want to shame this commenter, so I'm just going to read the comment. And this, anybody who's watched my content for a while knows I have a thing with disingenuous, because my opinion is if you think someone's being disingenuous, which is basically being insincere and playing dumb, engaging is pointless if you truly believe that. So this person said, hey, you forgot trade school. Come on, Leanna, do you really want to go with women are 2/3 of college students, but it's fine because men go to trade school? 60% is not 2/3. But this is a bit disingenuous. We've been pushed into college since the 80s as the designated path forward, and women get the bulk of the support. 60-40 by itself is only the start. There was all sorts of screaming when it was 40-60, and now just silence. That's part of the complaint, that men are simply ignored and left to their fate. Try to apply to college, and you'll find a raft of scholarships and support groups for women, but very few for men. The situation is lopsided, to say the least. So yes, it's a crisis, and tossing in trade school as a bone feels a bit too much like prescribed gender roles for my tastes. Where do you even begin with that? You know, I was going based on training on income level. It's not my fault that being an electrician or a plumber pays a lot better than a lot of jobs that people get college degrees for, you know? I don't make the rules, right? A job's a job. Money's money. And I'm sorry. The trades are honorable. It's honest work. Putting this, we've been pushed into college since the 80s. This particular commenter has watched my content. At this point, it's pretty clear. I'm not a fan of that. But I said a litmus test. I said, define disingenuous, and I'll have this conversation with you, because questioning my sincerity isn't a great tactic on this one. Set a really clear condition for the conversation, right? Define disingenuous. Here's his response. You started with a conversation and you started with a conclusion and work backwards. Your data is chosen to frame it as not as a problem for men. I explained this in the comment, but again, when women are 40%, it's a crisis. When they are 60%, a triumph. Men are largely ignored. This is the crisis. Again, women are near 2/3 of college students. Again, 60% is not 2/3, dude. And still get the bulk of the support. And it's often gender exclusive. Related issue. Men, especially poor men, are abandoned and denigrated. You rail against the manosphere, but where are the solutions? Offer them or propose a way to do so, and that's productive. He never defined disingenuous. He just didn't. And that matters, you know? This is a word that's, you keep saying this word, I do not think it means what you think it means. Because disingenuous doesn't mean framing an argument. It means not candid or sincere, typically by pretending that one knows less about something than one really does. All he had to do was Google and copy paste. And he didn't. And that's disingenuous. That is not candid. That is not sincere. So I respond. I asked you to define disingenuous. If I set a condition for a conversation and you don't honor that, you're being, disingenuous in that you're insincerely ignoring the request while continuing to strawman it. You think I'm wrong, but that's not the same as accusing me of playing dumb, and dodging the definition of the term destroys your argument. Do you notice how I didn't just say, you are being disingenuous? I explained why I'm making that claim. I said, I have offered solutions. You're disingenuously ignoring that I do weekly content on this issue. Poverty can't be a men's only solution. Poverty is intergenerational. Poverty is its own issue, which you are disingenuously conflating with a crisis in men. Multiple issues need to be addressed here, including mass incarceration, inflating required credentials for work, insisting on college when it's not needed, and, well, you've rejected my suggestion that we don't stigmatize the trades because they're good jobs. My cousin put 3 kids through college as an electrician. You're the one saying the trades aren't a pathway to success, and you blamed me for that when it's really your own bias. And I don't know why that idea that trade school is a perfectly valid career path triggered so many people. It really seemed like they want there to be a crisis because then they matter. And then they're all, debate this guy, debate this guy, debate this guy. No. Debate isn't going to solve this problem, right? And debates on the internet tend not to be debates. They're just chest beating and, talking past each other to score points with the very, your different audiences. And that's a waste of time for me. I don't see how it will do any good. One commenter said, and this is definitely tying into the objections with, oh, you're being disingenuous, college, we're forced into it. This commenter hit the nail on the head, right? Another mistake is to consider is an obsession with having a high status. You see this with a lot of that alpha sigma posturing. Basically, it's the superficial notion of wanting all the benefits and status of being a leader without actually accepting any of the responsibility that comes with such a title. Basically thinking that leadership simply means barking orders at your subordinates. And that's exactly what the commenter did. Offer solutions, make them practical. Like, I did. It won't do any good. I could talk for 6 hours on what I think we need to do. But, the commenter went on. A good leader should be a father to his men and inspire good values too, a shining beacon in the darkness. Think like Optimus Prime, Leonardo, or any Red Ranger. Honestly, it's up there with Stoicism and how the manosphere completely twists the idea into another part of romanticized suffering. And I do think that idea that there's, I say, there's a winner and losers. Like, was that Ace Ventura? Something like that. But there really is this Thunderdome mentality. And you notice the Arby's glass for Sir, this is an Arby's. But there is this idea that there's a winner and everybody else is a loser. Everything is framed in competition. And there's a certain amount of healthy competition where you get better by testing yourself against other people, learning from them. But we don't focus on cooperation nearly enough. We don't focus on cooperation between men. We don't focus on cooperation between men and women. We don't focus on cooperation between women either. But the thing is, to cooperate, you need to settle the fuck down long enough to not shit the bed like this. Not leading with an accusation that you can't prove. The stupid thing about accusations of being disingenuous is nobody can see inside my head or anybody else's. And I can prove a straw man here because he was just going, oh, come on. Oh, come on. Oh, come on. We're pushed towards college. That wasn't the point I was making. The point I was making is that the whole reason we care about college rates is earning potential. And if the trades have really good earning potential, well, we have to include those numbers, right? That makes absolute sense to me, and I could be wrong, but I'm sincerely wrong, which I'm a lot of things, but insincere is not one of them. I would have a very different approach to my content if that were so, and this is gonna sting, but it's said trying to help. Lunging at people like that, it comes across as weak. It comes across as insecure. It comes across as not being centered, which, in the animal kingdom metaphor, that's beta behavior. The beta is the one doing all the fighting. The alpha's the one that's got the riz and, is a dad. And I really hope that the Superman movie brings that back into vogue. We'll see. But this is not an issue with a simple solution, because the group men it's too big. Rich white men, for instance, have very different issues, and you can subcategorize white men right now, because if you consider Jewish people white, like, we got a fuck ton of problems right now. But, wealthy white men might have crises of identity, might have crises of self-worth. Sure, and that's valid, that matters. But they're far less likely to have a criminal record, or if they do, it's of the Robert Downey Jr. variety where they get a second chance, as opposed to people who, don't have powerful friends who have a criminal record. It means they can't find employment, and employment's, is a condition of parole. And if you don't get a job, you go back into prison. That's, and that's one of those things that's an issue that affects poor people more than rich people, black men more than white men, so on and so forth, right? But then you've got Asian men who have issues with the way they're depicted in media, and they're seen as, less manly than, and by this Asian, I include South Asian. They're seen as less manly than, other types of men. You've got issues with, indigenous men. You've got the tragic story of Jonathan Joss, who was shot dead by a neighbor. And that's the second John Redcorn actor who had an untimely death. The first guy to play that part got hit by a truck who ran a red light. the fact that men are more likely to be victims of violent crime, as well as the perpetrators, again, has a sort of cross socioeconomic thing. This isn't true of, rich men. It clusters in poor areas. And like I said, poverty, much like you can't solve the domestic violence issue by just funneling money into women's shelters. You can't solve the issues facing men right now in a vacuum. And it's going to involve discussions so that the various groups understand where each other are coming from. And it's not going to be a single solution. It's going to be a series of solutions to solve different facets of the problem, right? I don't know if this push to bring back manufacturing is really going to work. I don't think you can create enough jobs to solve the problem. I really do think that we need to, one, improve public high school education so it is once again the prerequisite for the majority of jobs, not college, right? If you need it to get a job, it should be provided for everybody, period, end of story. That's going to take some time. But I also think that a lot of jobs that claim to require college don't. And I think that that's an easier thing to do. A government can offer, tax credits for full-time employees with benefits instead of doing a bunch of part-timers, right? You get an income tax cut if you're a company that gives proper, living wage jobs. Because a family's rising and falling does still often depend on the income of the man in a heterosexual family, right? The attempts to replace the coal mining jobs with nursing in places like Kentucky, it didn't really work. It unmanned those men. And, they sat at home and took prescription drugs and were miserable. You have to give people a purpose. And that's really it. I mean, I know firsthand, I people call me ugly and just bottom of the barrel and all this shit. Basically call me a liar. And I know I have people that care about me. And I know I have people that support me. And yeah, I see the good comments too, right? And that's why this shit really doesn't affect my life. If you don't have people that you feel supported by, that you trust, yeah, those comments sting a lot more. They're a lot scarier. But also, in order to get those people, in order to meet those people, and this is, I'm working on getting guests for male content, but people are, hesitant because of all the hate, and I can't do anything about that. It's going to be a process. When it's not therapy, I have done men's issues, a lot of men's issues. I've had experts on that work with men, and let me tell you, they're fucking harsh on dudes. But in order to have people that you can trust, you have to trust. You have to put yourself out there and be cool and be vulnerable and not start conversations with accusations and insults. You are flagging yourself as not worth it. This pipe dream that I see again and again and again on the internet, that you can just rage and lash out and call people horrible shit, and they'll go, "What's wrong? Let's talk." not even your mother will probably do that. You know, somebody who raises somebody proper says, I love you, I care about your feelings, your behavior right now is not acceptable for me. So when you stop that, then we can talk. And, you know, I had a guy, he just misspoke earlier this week. And I actually said, all right, how do you expect me to respond to this? And eventually he realized that what he'd said had just completely come out the wrong way. And it was fine, you know? And honestly, the fact that he owned the mistake earned respect from me, because a lot of people don't, right? And that's the thing about this disingenuous thing. People will get farther with me to just present a counter argument. And a counter argument isn't, come on, really, come on, we're pushed towards college, come on what? What's wrong with being a carpenter? Roofers, $20,000 going out of my pocket into theirs. Hopefully we'll get a bit of a discount because the roofing material was lighter than the picture, but they're getting paid decent, right? It's hard work, but everything's hard work. Sitting here getting abused for a living is hard work, you know? And I mean, I did set decoration. I did crew when I was younger. It's honest work. But there are very few women in those jobs. And yeah, when you're talking about the overall employment stats, that matters. There's too many people with college degrees and not enough tradespeople. Disingenuous? Like, come on. If you've gotten sucked in to the whole college veneer thing, that college proves you're smart, it really doesn't. You know, look at all these, you know, guys like Zuckerberg who dropped out of Harvard. He's probably thinking, I made the right choice now, right? I mean, we're in an age where Ivy League degrees are, what are they worth? There's so many of them out there. Like, yeah, if you want to go into politics or certain types of, like, you know, white shoe law firms, yeah, you do have to have a prestigious school. But you got to figure out what you want to do. I talk to so many people who regret the degree they chose. And that's a terrible feeling because that's a very expensive regret. But those conversations happen because neither of us started off attacking. Opening with an attack is tactically unwise. Because if you miss, or the person just dodges out of the way, you fall flat on your face and leave yourself open. And the problem is these guys keep lunging. Come on, right? And then they're embarrassed. And then they feel shame. And then they go, men are being left to rot. It's like, no, man, you're not. I reached out a hand and you tried to bite it. You're not being ignored. You're being challenged. Take some responsibility for your approach. And even that is triggering. And they're triggered, so the fight, come on. We're being left to rot. It's a cycle. There is no one who can help you. If every time somebody reaches out a hand, you bite it off. That was true for me. That's true for everybody. People work with the people who are willing to put in the work. And when your opening move is to accuse somebody of dishonesty with nothing but, come on. And that's what calling somebody disingenuous is. Why should they invest in you? You know, You're not being left to rot. That's rotten. People don't want to get that on you, right? Be reasonable. Think. Like, actually use that college-educated brain, right? Holy crap, not that that helps you learn how to think. But there are solutions, but it really is. The reason I became a peer counselor is that one-to-one relationship. There's nothing for it, not a therapist, not anything like that. Peer counseling and mentorship, right? Just somebody to talk to that you can admit you're scared, that you can admit you're vulnerable, that isn't competitive or, antagonistic. None of this disingenuous. None of this, you're not hot enough. None of this, you're even less. Oh, there are better women than you. That's not somebody shoving you down. That's you taking a flop and going, why'd you push me? When you have someone you can work this stuff out with. And you don't have to pay people, but the reason I started my business is it's an affordable alternative to therapy, because a lot of people don't need a therapist. They need somebody to strategize with. They need just, a sanity check about certain things. They need some strategies, and I happen to just have enough diverse experience and things to go, okay, here's some basic things to consider. But it really does come down to what are your values and what do you want? And if you can't answer those questions, no amount of attacking people in comment sections in the world is going to make your life better. You got to decide you're worth it. You got to decide that you're going to stop doing the things that are not helping you, make changes, and start being more productive. Because there are plenty of people working to help men. There's a dedicated men's shelter in Toronto. There's a homeless shelter exclusively for men with career and addiction services like 20 minutes south of me. It's out there. It says, people are leaving men to rot. Nobody cares. I'm sorry. This is not true. And I know some of these people who watch this content, and I say this, I provide all the examples, and they're still, nobody cares. You're leaving men to rot. If you're feeling mocked, and if you think that's very feminized performance, well, it's just not true. Start living in reality. Start recognizing, okay, it may not have been great so far. People may have been shit to you. They probably were. That's real. That's absolutely real. The pain is real. The disappointment is real. The sense of hopelessness is real. But past isn't prologue. It can be better. But you got to take the first step. You have to stop biting those hands that reach out to you. Help support this channel. Become a monthly patron. Patreon.com/Leanna K. Or buy a one-time Leanna Care session for someone who can use it but can't afford it. Coffee.com/Leanna K. There you go, Bobby Calloway. You got a 45-minute video now. I went easy on you on Tuesday. Anyway, thanks for watching and have a great weekend.